My name is Don Frankenfeld, and I'm a forensic economist. Over the last 18 years, I've been engaged to testify as an expert in a number of wrongful death cases, and I've defended my analysis and conclusions in state and federal courts across the country. I'm a 1970 graduate of Yale University and earned my MBA from Harvard Business School in 1975. In 1987, I returned to Harvard as a Bush Foundation Fellow, where I studied economics and the law and advanced torts at Harvard Law School, participated in the Harvard program on negotiation, and studied alternate dispute resolution at the John F. Kennedy School of Government. Attorney Barry Timken has asked me to prepare an economic loss report on behalf of Digna Alexandra Rivera Costanza, who worked in the World Trade Center and died on September 11, 2001. My purpose in this video presentation is to briefly summarize my analysis, methods, and conclusions. You may have questions which I did not anticipate in creating this presentation, so of course I will be available to address those questions in whatever forum or format you choose. In preparing my report, I had a twofold mission. First, I sought to master the intricacies of the Special Master's 9-step formula. Every jurisdiction has its own rules, of course, and the rules the Special Master has developed and the way in which they are applied differ somewhat from the protocols that apply in other jurisdictions. So I carefully studied the published material made available by the Special Master's office, particularly the explanation of process for computing presumed economic loss, together with its appended tables. I read and analyzed a number of economic loss reports, with names redacted, which were submitted to the Victims' Compensation Fund by other economists. When matters of interpretation arose, I consulted with Mr. Timken and other attorneys to seek their opinion. Ultimately, when detailed questions arose that could not otherwise be resolved, I called PricewaterhouseCoopers. Kristen Johnson, John Wills, and Randy Ferris of that firm were extremely helpful. I now understand the 9-step model quite well. In support of that assertion, I refer you to a memo I sent to Kristen Johnson describing a possible mistake in the Special Master's published tables, and her response indicating that the tables were indeed in error at the $15,000 income level and had been revised appropriately. In addition, I refer you to a website created by my firm and available at www.vcfestimator.com, which provides a detailed emulation of the 9-step formula. This site is available to all victims, victim representatives, and their attorneys, and it calculates and displays presumed awards according to the 9-step formula. I believe that any methodological differences between my approach and that of the VCF hearing examiners will be very slight and can probably be ascribed to differences in interpolation methods. Second, I sought to examine, as carefully as I could, the individual circumstances of Ms. Costanza's economic situation. For that, I reviewed the VCF submissions prepared by Mr. Timken and the detailed financial documentation supplied by Ms. Costanza's employer, Marsh & McLennan. I also visited at length with Mr. Costanza by telephone and visited with Human Resource Specialist Reginald McQuay of Marsh & McLennan. In addition, Mr. Timken provided documentation regarding Mr. Costanza's economic circumstances. My single-point estimate of Ms. Costanza's economic and non-economic losses, when calculated in accord with the 9-step formula, is $2,246,579. This includes a non-economic loss of $550,000, an economic loss calculated in accord with the 9-step formula of $1,359,625, and a supplemental loss for replacement of home services of $247,455. In addition, I calculate Mr. Costanza's economic losses at $89,499. The details of my analysis are contained in my written report, and I will summarize briefly here. Generally, my report addresses each area of analysis in the same order as the Special Master's explanation of process. I made a $4,000 adjustment to Mrs. Costanza's base income to reflect the completion of a 108-hour course in preparation for her receiving an insurance license. Her base compensable income, as I calculated, was $36,000. According to the U.S. Department of Labor, this $36,000 figure compares with median compensation for insurance licensees in the United States of $38,750. In New York City, the mean wage for insurance processing clerks is $39,568, and for insurance agents, it is $66,950. An interpolated tax rate of 14.17% was derived from the table supplied by the special master. Next, let's look at employer-provided benefits. In keeping with the expressed willingness of the special master to consider a victim's actual benefits, I have overridden the 4% default retirement income figure in favor of the actual employer's contribution, which I calculate to be 8.47%. This figure, in turn, is based principally on the cost of funding a fixed pension of $14,234, commencing at age 65. To calculate the annual cost of the pension, I have used the special master's assumptions regarding discount rate, work-life expectancy, and 3% unemployment allowance. Please note that a company actuary would employ different assumptions than those I have used to calculate cost. For example, an employer's actuary would certainly apply a female-only work-life expectancy table, while I have employed the special master's male-only table. Common sense dictates that only one work-life expectancy should be applied to Mrs. Costanza throughout the report. Please note that for the pension calculation, incorporating the special master's longer work life modestly reduces Mrs. Costanza's award entitlement, because the shorter funding cycle of a female-only table would require larger funding expenditures each year, and this would lead to a commensurately larger fringe benefit estimate. The next item of the 9-step formula, calculating remaining years of work-life participation, was straightforward. I used the special master's Table 2 and interpolated. Calculating annual earnings growth rates and the 3% contingency allowance were similarly straightforward. With respect to personal consumption, I used the special master's tables but made allowance for the extreme likelihood that this recently married couple would have children in accord with their documented intent. To speculate that the couple would have been childless flies in the face of overwhelming statistics to the contrary. I have assumed the birth of their first child after 1 year, and their second child 2 years later. I've supplemented the 9-step calculations with 2 additional elements of loss which I believe to be necessary and appropriate. The first supplemental loss is for the replacement cost of household services. In the case of the Costanzas, this principally reflects the fact that Digna Costanza cooked nearly all meals for the couple, and that now John Costanza dines out on most days. Assuming a loss of 14 hours per week, valued at $10 per hour, the present value of this supplemental loss is $247,455. The other area of supplemental loss pertains directly to Mr. Costanza, who continues to wrestle with deep and debilitating depression. As a direct consequence of the September 11th tragedy, he works fewer hours, at lower wages than formerly. If this situation were to persist through the balance of his work life, the present value of this supplemental loss would exceed $400,000. Instead, I have assumed diminished earning capacity for 5 years, with a resultant loss of $89,499. I believe my arguments are reasonable and my analysis consistent with the published philosophy and methods of the special master. As always, a certain degree of judgment is required. Because I do not know whether my judgment will in every case be sustained by VCF hearing examiners, I have segregated the various loss elements by category. For example, if hearing examiners should decide to ignore household replacement costs, they can do so by striking this $247,455 item from my calculated total of $2,246,579. I acknowledge that this brief presentation, developed unilaterally, does not fully substitute for a complete, direct, or cross-examination. I hope you have found it useful in highlighting potential areas of inquiry and that my explanations have been of value. I look forward to addressing any additional questions that may arise in whatever format you deem appropriate.